Snow buried the dead city, turning collapsed buildings into white tombstones. 1,000 Marines trapped inside the ring, radios silent, supplies gone. The order came through short and cold: withdraw. No one goes back. But on the rooftop of an abandoned high-rise, two figures remained, two black sisters, snipers, breathing white mist into the frozen air. They heard the order clearly, and for the first time in their military careers, they chose not to obey. The train station had collapsed 3 weeks ago. Now it was just a skeleton of steel beams and concrete slabs, buried under 12 feet of snow. The main boulevard ran empty for 6 blocks, storefronts frozen mid-scream, shattered glass turned to ice spikes. No movement, no sound except wind scraping against stone. Inside that ring of white death, 1,000 Marines huddled in basement shelters and blown-out apartment blocks. They'd been cut off for 19 days. The supply drops stopped on day 12. The medevac choppers stopped coming on day 15. The radios crackled with static and lies. Captain Davis crouched in what used to be a hotel lobby, now a fortified bunker smelling of diesel fuel and old blood. His boots hadn't been dry in a week. 43 dead, 72 wounded. Food for maybe 2 more days if they cut portions again. The encrypted message came through at 0447 hours. Wolfpack actual. This is command. Situation assessed as unrecoverable. Execute Protocol Sable. Acknowledge. Davis stared at the screen. Protocol Sable. Controlled withdrawal. Abandoned position. He looked around the room. 30 Marines sleeping against walls, weapons across their laps. Jenkins with his leg wrapped in bloody gauze. Morrison with frostbite blackening 3 fingers. Chen, who'd stopped talking 2 days ago, just stared at the ceiling. Wolfpack actual acknowledges, Davis typed back. The reply was instant. Extraction not feasible. You are authorized to disperse and evade. Coordinates for RV points transmitted. Good luck. No choppers, no reinforcements, no extraction. Just walk out through enemy lines, scattered and alone, and maybe some of them would make it. Davis closed his eyes. Around him, the basement went silent, except for breathing, and the wind howling through broken windows 3 floors up. They'd been left for dead. 15 blocks north, the Riverside Tower still stood. 27 stories of abandoned luxury condos, every window blown out, top floor open to the sky like a mouth full of broken teeth. Staff Sergeant Maya Brennan lay prone on the frozen concrete, eye pressed to her scope. Beside her, 3 feet to the right, her sister Grace mirrored the position. Same breathing rhythm, same stillness. They'd been on this rooftop for 18 days. The wind cut across the exposed floor, temperature somewhere around -15. Maya's fingers had gone numb inside her gloves 6 hours ago. She'd learned to shoot without feeling them. Grace shifted slightly, adjusting her angle. Her scope swept across the eastern sector, where enemy positions had consolidated around the old fire station. 12 combatants visible, probably twice that inside. The encrypted burst transmission came through both their earpieces simultaneously. All units, this is command. Execute Protocol Sable. Repeat, Protocol Sable is now active. Disperse and evade. Acknowledge. Maya's eye didn't leave her scope. Grace's breathing didn't change. The transmission repeated. Then again, below them, across the frozen city, 1,000 Marines were receiving the same message. Prepare to scatter. Leave the wounded who couldn't move. Abandon everything you can't carry. Save yourselves. Maya finally lifted her head from the scope. She looked at Grace. Grace was already looking back. Neither of them spoke for a full minute. The wind screamed between them, carrying snow that felt like broken glass. We acknowledge the order, Grace finally said, her voice quiet. Maya nodded slowly. Then Grace added, that doesn't mean we're following it. They'd grown up in Detroit, in a neighborhood where gunshots were the evening soundtrack. Their father had been Army, died in Kandahar when Maya was 12 and Grace was 10. Their mother worked double shifts at the hospital and taught them 2 things. Take care of each other, and never let anyone tell you what you can't do. Maya enlisted at 18. Grace followed 2 years later. The recruiter had tried to steer them toward admin roles. Women in combat arms is still new, he'd said, smiling like he was doing them a favor. Maybe start with something clearer. Maya had scored expert marksman on her first qualification. Grace beat her score by 2 points. Sniper school was supposed to break them. The instructors made that clear the first day. 23 candidates started. 19 were men. 4 weeks later, 11 graduated. Maya placed second in the class. Grace placed first. The first week had been hell. lying motionless in positions for 8 hours straight while instructors walked past them, sometimes stepping within inches of their faces. The slightest movement meant failure. They'd watched candidates crack, watched grown men cry from the pain of staying frozen that long, watched others quit when the psychological pressure of absolute stillness became too much. Maya and Grace had barely blinked. Most washouts can't handle the cold, their instructor had told them. Can't handle lying still for 16 hours. Can't handle the waiting. Staff Sergeant Chen had been a legend himself. 3 tours. 78 confirmed kills. A man who could read wind like poetry and calculate bullet drop in his sleep. He'd been skeptical of the Brennan sisters at first. 2 black women in his sniper program. He'd seen diversity initiatives before, seen people pushed through who shouldn't have been. But after the first week, he'd pulled them aside. "I've been doing this for 15 years, he'd said. "I've trained 200 candidates, maybe 30, became truly exceptional snipers. You two." He'd paused, looking between them. "You two have something I've never seen before. You don't just shoot well, you think like the rifle is part of you." Maya had shrugged. "We've had practice waiting." Chen had frowned. "What do you mean?" Grace had answered for both of them. "Our father was deployed 3 times. We learned to wait for him to come home, to stay still and quiet while Mom worked nights, to be patient when things were hard. That's not the same as combat shooting." "No, sir," Maya had agreed. "But stillness is stillness. Patience is patience. The rifle just gives us something to do with it." Their father, Marcus Brennan, had been the kind of soldier who believed in duty above everything. He'd taught them to shoot on a rural range outside Detroit, BB guns first, then, 22 seconds when they got older, he'd made it a game. Who could hold position longest? Who could control their breathing best? Who could make the impossible shot? Maya remembered the last competition, 2 weeks before his final deployment. She'd been 12, sprawled prone on a picnic table, aiming at a target 200 yards away. Aiken balanced on a fence post. Wind gusting, light fading. "You won't make it," Dad had said gently. "Too far, too much wind. Even I'd have trouble with this one." Maya had taken 3 breaths. Let the wind patterns settle into rhythm. Squeezed the trigger on the exhale. The can had spun off the fence post. Dad had stared at it for a long moment. Then he'd looked down at her with something like pride and something like fear in his eyes. "You're going to do extraordinary things, baby girl," he'd whispered. "Just promise me you'll be smart about it." 3 months later, he was dead. IED on a patrol route that command had sworn was clear. Maya and Grace had looked at each other and understood without speaking. Their father had followed orders, had trusted the system, and the system had killed him. They'd still enlisted, because that's what Brennans did. But they'd made a silent pact. They would serve. They would excel. But they would never forget that orders came from humans, and humans made mistakes. The last days of sniper school had tested them in ways the instructors hadn't anticipated. The final exercise was a 72-hour field training mission. Candidates were dropped in wilderness, given targets to eliminate, and told to survive. Maya and Grace had worked as a perfect unit. They'd established observation posts that other candidates walked past without seeing. They'd eliminated targets from ranges that made the instructors recalibrate their expectations. They'd survived on minimal food and water because they'd learned that skill the hard way, growing up poor in Detroit. On the last day, Grace had taken a shot that became Academy legend. 1,000 yards. Target partially concealed. Wind gusting 30 knots. Rain making visibility almost zero. She'd waited 6 hours for the moment. The single instant, when all variables aligned. When the wind dropped. When the rain paused. When the target shifted position enough to expose a clear line. She'd fired once. Target eliminated. Chen had called them into his office afterward. "I'm putting both of you forward for advanced training. You're the best candidates I've seen in my entire career." He'd paused. "But I need to tell you something." "Yes, sir?" "Out there, in the real world, people are going to doubt you. They're going to assume you got here because of quotas, because of politics. They're going to wait for you to fail." Maya and Grace had looked at each other. "Let them wait," Grace had said quietly. "We've gotten good at that." And they'd made a promise to each other. The night before their first deployment, lying in adjacent bunks in the dark barracks, Grace had whispered it across the space between them. "We don't leave each other, ever. Not for orders, not for missions, not for anything." Maya had answered, "We don't leave anyone if we can save them." That promise had been tested in small ways over the years. The wounded soldier they'd carried 3 miles through hostile territory when the medevac was delayed. The civilian family they'd sheltered during a firefight when protocol said to avoid contact. The intelligence officer they'd refused to abandon when his convoy was ambushed. But never like this. Not until 1,000 men were about to die in the snow. And the only thing standing between them and death was two sisters who'd learned patience in a Detroit neighborhood, learned precision from a father who didn't come home, and learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to walk away. Maya pulled out her tactical map, the plastic crackling with ice. She spread it across the concrete, Grace sliding over to study it beside her. The Marine positions were marked in blue, 16 clusters spread across a 12-block radius. The enemy positions were marked in red, forming a loose perimeter around them, and in black, the withdrawal routes command had transmitted. Grace traced one with her finger. They'd have to cross 4 open intersections. This one passes within 50 meters of that machine gun nest we marked on day 9. Maya followed another route. This one goes through the collapsed parking structure. They'd be channeled single file, easy kill zone. They studied the map in silence. The math was brutal and simple. Maybe 300 would make it out. The rest would be cut down in the streets or freeze trying to hide. Grace looked up at the cityscape around them. From their position, they could see almost everything. The entire battlefield spread out like a model, every street and building locked in ice. "We've got 1,100 rounds left," she said. "Split between us." Maya nodded. "Wind is steady from the northwest, 15 knots. Visibility good until the next storm hits, probably 6 hours. High ground advantage. They still don't know where we are. The Marines are clustered. If we create gaps in the enemy line, they could consolidate, maybe hold long enough for a real extraction." Grace met her sister's eyes. "If we do this, we're burning our careers. Court-martial, maybe prison. If we don't do this, they die." Maya's voice was flat, factual, all of them. The wind howled across the rooftop. Somewhere below, a piece of frozen metal clanged against stone. Grace reached out and gripped Maya's shoulder. Dad would have stayed. Mom would have told us we're idiots. Probably. They both smiled, cold and sharp. Maya keyed her radio, switching to the encrypted channel that linked to command. Her voice was steady, professional. "Command, this is Overwatch 7. We acknowledge Protocol Sable. Beginning withdrawal procedures now." The response was immediate. "Acknowledged. Overwatch 7. Good hunting." Maya switched off the radio and looked at Grace. "Let's go to work," Grace said. The shot came at 0521 hours, just as dawn tried to break through the storm clouds. Maya's target was a spotter positioned in the bell tower of the old church, 400 meters east. He'd been directing mortar fire for 3 days, calling coordinates that had killed 6 Marines and wounded 14 more. She'd been watching him for 72 hours, knew his rotation, knew he took a smoke break every morning at 0520, standing at the window to light it. The wind was steady. She compensated left, elevated for drop, let her breathing slow to nothing. The rifle kicked. The sound cracked across the frozen city like a breaking bone. 400 meters away, the spotter dropped, cigarette still unlit in his hand. Grace fired 3 seconds later. Her target was a machine gunner on the roof of the fire station, 520 meters. He'd been setting up to cover the main intersection where 2 Marine units would have to cross during their withdrawal. He fell backward into the snow, and the city erupted. Confusion first. Then, panic. The enemy fighters scrambled for cover, scanning rooftops, shouting into radios. They'd been hunting these snipers for weeks. 2 ghosts in the snow that killed without warning and vanished without trace. Maya worked methodically. Target, breathe, fire. Target, breathe, fire. A forward observer trying to radio coordinates. Down. A squad leader rallying his fighters near the pharmacy. Down. An RPG team setting up to hit the Marine position in the basement of the old bank. Both shooters down within 4 seconds. Grace matched her rhythm. They didn't speak. They'd trained for this, knew each other's patterns better than their own heartbeats. In the basement of the hotel, Captain Davis heard the shots. Distant cracks echoing through the frozen streets, then enemy radio chatter exploding into chaos on the captured frequency. "They're being hit," Lieutenant Park said, listening to the translation. "Multiple casualties. They can't locate the shooter." Davis looked at the ceiling, as if he could see through it to the sky. "Who's still out there?" Nobody answered. According to command, nobody was supposed to be out there, but someone was. And they were killing with surgical precision. In the burned-out apartment building 3 blocks south, Sergeant Williams peered through a crack in the barricaded window. He watched an enemy patrol scatter as their leader's head snapped back, killed by a shot that came from nowhere. "Angels," he whispered. "We got angels watching us." The Marines began to hope. The enemy wasn't stupid. Within an hour, they'd organized counter-sniper teams. Maya spotted them first. 3 pairs, moving through the buildings in coordinated patterns, using mirror signals to communicate without radios. "They're hunting us," she said quietly. Grace adjusted her scope. Let them come. But staying in one position meant death. The enemy had triangulated their general area from the shot angles. Sooner or later, they'd narrow it down to this building. They packed quickly. Ammunition, water, medical kit, left everything else. The stairwell was a death trap, so they used the exterior fire escape. Metal so cold it burned through gloves, ice making every step treacherous. Maya went first, rifle slung across her back, testing each ladder rung. Halfway down, gunfire erupted from the building across the street. Rounds sparked off the metal railing, fragmenting into ice shrapnel. Maya dropped into a controlled slide, hit the platform below, brought her rifle up in one fluid motion, found the muzzle flash, fired twice. The shooting stopped. Grace came down behind her, already scanning for the next threat. They moved through the city like smoke. 3rd floor window, fire 2 shots, relocate, rooftop access, 3 targets eliminated, climb down through the elevator shaft, basement entrance, wait for pursuers, ambush from behind. The buildings were a maze of frozen corridors and collapsed floors. They used it all. Rope lines across gaps where floors had given way, rappelling down ventilation shafts, crawling through ducts filled with ice and darkness. Grace took a shot through a hole in the wall, no bigger than a fist. 600 meters, target partially concealed behind a concrete barrier. The round entered through the 3-inch gap between his helmet and body armor. Maya fired from inside a frozen water tank, the metal shell hiding her muzzle flash. Her shot went through a window, across an empty room, out another window, and into the throat of a fighter trying to set up a heavy machine gun. They never spoke during the moves, hand signals only. A touch on the shoulder meant stop. 2 fingers pointed meant enemy ahead. A closed fist meant hold position. They'd done this dance 1,000 times in training. But training didn't include the cold that made your joints scream, didn't include the exhaustion of 19 days without real sleep, didn't include the knowledge that every shot might be your last. In a 3rd-floor apartment, Maya's foot went through rotted floorboards. Grace caught her arm before she fell, pulled her back. Below them, they heard voices. Enemy fighters searching the building. They held absolutely still, controlled their breathing to silence, became part of the frozen wreckage around them. The voices moved on. Grace checked Maya's leg. Bruised, not broken. They kept moving. The enemy withdrawal started at 1,134 hours. Captain Davis watched through binoculars as enemy positions began to thin out. The heavy machine gun nests that had pinned them down for days were being abandoned. Mortar teams packing up and moving. "They're pulling back to consolidate," Park said, "trying to protect their command elements." Because the invisible snipers were systematically eliminating their leadership. Every officer, every squad leader, every coordinator they tried to put in position was dead within minutes. Davis made a decision. "We're not dispersing. We're pushing forward." His officers stared at him. "Sir, the order." "The order was based on us being alone." Davis cut him off. "We're not alone. Someone's out there buying us time. We use it." Within 20 minutes, 3 Marine units had linked up, consolidating from scattered positions into a coordinated force. Medics moved the wounded to more secure locations. Ammunition was redistributed. Defensive positions reinforced. The Marines who'd been preparing to die alone were suddenly fighting again. They retook the intersection at 5th and Broad. 8 enemy fighters fled, and only 3 made it to cover. The rest fell to fire from positions they couldn't identify. They secured the old post office, finding a cache of enemy supplies inside. Medicine, food, ammunition. Sergeant Williams led a squad in a flanking maneuver that would have been suicide an hour ago. But when they crossed the open street, the machine gun nest that should have torn them apart stayed silent. The gunner was dead at his weapon, killed by a shot from somewhere in the frozen sky. The Marines started calling them the Ice Angels, 2 phantoms in the White Death, delivering salvation 1 shot at a time. Common's encrypted traffic became increasingly confused. The situation they deemed unrecoverable was recovering. The Marines they'd written off were fighting back. The enemy that had seemed overwhelming was falling apart. At 1,347 hours, Command sent an urgent transmission, Wolfpack actual, status report. We're receiving inconsistent data. Confirm your position and intent. Davis looked at the message for a long time. Then he replied, Wolfpack is holding. Hostiles degraded. Request immediate extraction. Coordinates to follow. There was a long pause. Then, extraction assets being prepared. ETA 4 hours. Hold position. In the frozen bell tower of the old church, Lieutenant Park lowered his radio and allowed himself the smallest smile. They were going home. Maya's hands wouldn't stop shaking. Not from fear, from cold, from exhaustion, from the adrenaline that had kept her sharp for 19 days finally starting to crack. They were in the basement of a collapsed department store, hidden behind a wall of frozen mannequins that had tumbled when the ceiling came down. 400 rounds left between them. No food since yesterday. Water bottles frozen solid. Grace was binding Maya's shoulder. The shrapnel wound from the grenade that had detonated 2 floors above them 30 minutes ago. Small fragments. Not deep, but bleeding steadily through the makeshift bandage. The blood was warm against Maya's skin. Strange how you noticed warmth when everything else had been cold for so long. Grace worked efficiently, tearing strips from her own undershirt to create better bandages. Their first aid kit had run out 6 days ago. We should pull back, Grace said quietly. The Marines are consolidating. We've done enough. Maya shook her head. They're still exposed on the western flank. That entire sector is... Maya. Grace gripped her sister's unwounded shoulder. Look at me. Maya met her eyes. In the dim light filtering through the collapsed ceiling, Grace's face was hollowed out, cheekbones too prominent, dark circles like bruises under her eyes, lips cracked and bleeding from the cold. Maya knew she looked the same. 19 days of this frozen hell had carved them down to something harder and sharper than they'd been before. We've been awake for 43 hours, Grace continued. You're bleeding. I can barely feel my feet. If we stay, we're going to make a mistake. And when we make a mistake... She didn't finish. She didn't have to. One mistake, one missed shot, one moment of weakness, and the enemy would triangulate their position, would bring everything they had down on this building. Maya's hands were still shaking. She looked down at them, these tools that had saved 1,000 lives in the last 6 hours. They didn't feel like hers anymore. The fingers were white with cold, nails turning blue, frostbite threatening the tips. She thought about the piano lessons Mom had insisted on when they were kids. How Maya had hated them at first, how her fingers had learned to move across keys with precision and grace. Those same fingers now pulled triggers instead of playing chords. Still precise, still graceful, but creating silence instead of music. I keep seeing Dad, she said softly, standing in the doorway before his last deployment, the way he looked at us, like he was trying to memorize our faces. Grace's expression didn't change, but her grip tightened. Maya felt her sister's pulse through that grip. Still strong, still steady. He died following orders, Maya continued. Good orders. The right orders. And I've spent my whole career trying to be like him. Following the chain of command. Trusting the system. Until today. Until today. Maya looked up at the ceiling, at the frozen pipes and cracked concrete. Mom's going to be so angry. Grace actually smiled at that, small and sad. Mom's always angry, part of her charm. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, distant gunfire rattled across the frozen city, getting further away. The enemy was retreating. The Marines were winning. Because 2 sisters had refused to abandon them. Maya thought about the career she'd built. 9 years of service, commendations, medals she'd never cared about, the respect of her unit, the trust of her commanders, all of it gone now, burned away in 6 hours of defiance. And she felt nothing. No regret, no fear. Just a strange, quiet certainty that this was exactly where she was supposed to be. Grace must have sensed her thoughts. She always did. You remember what Mom said when Dad enlisted? She told him that some men follow orders, but good men follow their conscience. And when those 2 things conflict, conscience matters more. Maya hadn't thought about that conversation in years. She'd been so young when she'd overheard it, hiding at the top of the stairs while her parents argued in the kitchen below. She also said it would probably get him killed, Maya pointed out. Yeah, Grace's voice was soft. She was right about that, too. Maya checked her ammunition. 237 rounds. Grace had 163. Enough for maybe 2 more hours of sustained support. The math was brutal. 400 rounds, 1,000 Marines. If each round saved 2.5 lives, they'd make it. But math didn't account for missed shots, for enemy reinforcements. For the 1,000 variables that turned battlefield calculations into guesswork, the extraction birds come in from the north, Grace said, reading Maya's thoughts like she always did. If we can suppress the AA positions in that sector, the choppers won't take fire on approach. Maya nodded slowly. One last push. One last push. They helped each other stand. Every joint screamed. Every muscle was lead. Maya's shoulder throbbed where the shrapnel had torn flesh. Grace's ankle had swollen so badly she'd had to cut her bootlaces just to get it on. But they'd made a promise, years ago in a dark barracks. We don't leave anyone if we can save them. Grace squeezed Maya's hand. When this is over, we're probably going to jail. Yeah. Was it worth it? Maya looked at her sister, thought about 1,000 Marines climbing onto helicopters, going home, seeing their families, living, growing old, having children who would never know that their parents' lives had been saved by 2 women who chose defiance over duty. Yes, she said, it was worth it. They loaded fresh magazines and climbed back into position. Maya's hands had stopped shaking. Grace's breathing had steadied. They were going to finish this. The helicopters came at 1,756 hours, just as the sun broke through the storm clouds for the first time in days. Black Hawks, 4 of them, flying in tight formation over the northern sector. Their approach was textbook perfect, using the buildings for cover, staying low and fast. On the rooftop of the water treatment plant, Maya tracked the lead aircraft through her scope, not targeting, just watching, making sure nothing else was targeting either. Grace swept the sector. 200 meters east, an enemy fighter emerged from a doorway carrying a shoulder-fired missile. She fired before he could raise it. He dropped, the missile clattering across the ice. Maya shifted to cover the extraction point. Captain Davis had organized the Marines into groups, wounded first. The choppers were touching down in the plaza outside the old courthouse, the only clear area big enough. The enemy made one final push, a last desperate attempt to stop the evacuation. They came from 3 directions, concentrating fire on the plaza. RPGs, mortars, heavy machine guns. Maya and Grace went to work. Target selection was pure instinct now, threat assessment faster than thought, the mortar team setting up behind the rubble pile, the RPG gunner taking aim from the 3rd-floor window, the machine gunner trying to establish a firing position. Their rifles spoke in steady rhythm, a conversation in death. Each shot a word, each kill a sentence. The enemy advance shattered before it could form. The first helicopter lifted off, packed with wounded Marines. The second followed 90 seconds later. The third, Grace's rifle clicked empty. She dropped the magazine, reached for a fresh one, found none. That's it, she said. I'm out. Maya had 17 rounds left. The 4th helicopter was loading the last group. Captain Davis was pushing Marines aboard, doing a final head count. Almost everyone was in. A sniper shot cracked from somewhere east. Lieutenant Park stumbled, blood spreading across his shoulder. Marines dragged him toward the helicopter. Maya scanned for the shooter. Found him. 7th floor of the apartment complex, partially hidden behind a concrete pillar. Difficult shot, wind gusting, range, 700 meters, moving target. She steadied her breathing, felt Grace's hand on her back, anchoring her. 1 shot left after this. She fired. The enemy sniper fell. The last helicopter lifted off at 1,804 hours. Every Marine aboard, 0 left behind. Maya and Grace watched them disappear into the cloud cover, rotors fading to silence. The city was quiet again, just wind and ice and the ghosts of the last 3 weeks. We should go, Grace said. Maya nodded, but neither of them moved. They stood there on the frozen rooftop, watching the sun paint the clouds gold and red. The dead city spread out below them, beautiful and terrible in the dying light. After a long moment, Maya keyed her radio one last time, not to command, to the frequency the Marines used. Wolfpack, she said quietly. This is Overwatch 7. You're clear. Stay safe. She didn't wait for a response, just switched off the radio and dismantled it, scattering the pieces in the snow. They descended through the building in silence, left their firing positions, left their empty magazines, left no trace except the brass casings that would tell the story to anyone who found them. By the time they reached street level, the sun had set. The city was dark again. They walked west, away from the extraction point, into the frozen wilderness beyond the city limits, 2 shadows disappearing into white death. The official report was 11 pages long and revealed almost nothing. Marines successfully extracted from contested urban environment following sustained defensive operations. Casualty rate, 4.3%. Enemy forces neutralized through coordinated defensive measures. No mention of the withdrawal order, no mention of defiance, no mention of 2 snipers who chose to stay. Captain Davis tried to file an after-action report detailing what actually happened. It was classified above his pay grade within an hour. When he pushed harder, he received a quiet visit from a colonel who explained that sometimes the best way to honor heroes was to let them remain anonymous. The Marines knew, though. In barracks and mess halls, on training ranges and deployment zones, the story spread. 2 sisters, black, snipers, saved 1,000 lives, defied direct orders and disappeared before anyone could thank them. No one knew their names. The official roster showed 2 casualties marked as killed in action, remains unrecovered. But no one who'd been in that frozen city believed it. They'd seen the shots. Impossible angles, impossible accuracy. They'd watched enemy positions collapse under fire that came from nowhere. They'd survived because 2 ghosts in the snow decided 1,000 lives mattered more than orders. Maya and Grace Brennan were never found. The military police searched for 6 months, found the rooftop positions, found the brass casings, found the blood where Maya had been wounded, found nothing else. Some said they'd died in the frozen wilderness. Others said they'd made it to Allied territory and gone underground. A few claimed to have seen them, brief glimpses in crowd or distance, before they vanished again. The truth was simpler and more difficult. They'd walked out of the city into the frozen forest. 3 days of hard travel to reach the neutral zone, 2 more days to the border. They split up there. Safer that way. Maya worked construction in a small town where no one asked questions. Grace became a mechanic in a city 300 miles away. Different names, different lives, different people than they'd been. But every year on the anniversary, they met. A diner in the middle of nowhere. Same booth, same coffee. They never talked about the frozen city. Didn't need to. It was there in the silence between them, in the way they sat with their backs to the wall, in the way they scanned the room without thinking. Some legends are made of lies and exaggeration. Others are made of 2 sisters in the snow, breathing frost into the frozen air, choosing defiance over obedience, choosing life over orders. The Marines they saved went on to live their lives. They became fathers and mothers, teachers and builders. Some stayed in the service, some left, but all of them remembered. Remembered that when command had written them off, someone had stayed. And in the quiet moments, when the snow fell and the wind howled, they looked up at the sky and whispered thanks to the ice angels, the ghosts who wouldn't abandon them, the sisters who proved that sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is refuse to follow orders. And somewhere, in 2 different cities, Maya and Grace Brennan heard that gratitude echo across the distance, and knew they'd made the right choice. Even if the world would never know their names,